How would you describe the European Union in 18 words?
Which sometimes is too slow, for sure, and needs to be reformed, for sure, but which is predictable, loyal.
This clip from Emmanuel Macron's speech, delivered in classic aviator sunglasses, dominated global media coverage. Not only because of the French president's polished oratory, presence and confident gestures, but because it captured a deeper truth about today's European Union, especially when set against what is unfolding elsewhere in the world. This year's Davos summit, traditionally dismissed as winter camp for the global elite, produced more moments like this than usual, and for good reason. If the United States openly reaching for de jure European territory in the form of Greenland, the last remaining sense of normality is disappearing. Everything's destiny is to change, to be transformed, to perish, so that new things can be born, Marcus Aurelius once said. After years of hesitation and gradual resistance, are European and broader Western leaders finally beginning to accept and implement this change? Ursula von der Leyen is often associated with speeches that ultimately amount to very little. Was it different this time? Quote, "Geopolitical shocks can and must serve as an opportunity for Europe. In my view, the seismic change we are going through today is an opportunity. In fact, a necessity to build a new form of European independence," the president of the European Commission said in Davos. And indeed, stripped of its illusions by Donald Trump, the European Union is now introducing a long-postulated framework for business, EU Inc. Pushed into a corner, Europe has no choice but to reform. Will it do so successfully? Can Euromaxing save Europe? In her speech, von der Leyen focused on three pillars: business, investment markets, and energy. Let's begin with the first. Once again, let's give the floor to the President of the European Commission. Quote, "The ultimate aim is to create a new, truly European company structure. We call it EU Incorporated, with a single and simple set of rules that will apply seamlessly all over our union." Unquote. So what does this actually mean? EU Inc. is a new pan-European legal standard designed to make it easier to establish, scale, and finance startups across the European Union. Its goal is to create an optional 28th legal form, operating alongside national structures such as SARL in France or GmbH in Germany, but based on a single unified rulebook valid throughout the EU. In practical terms, EU Inc. would allow a company to be registered in any member state within 48 hours, fully online through a single central registry and under identical capital rules. The initiative rests on several key pillars: a common legal statute, EU-wide harmonization of ECOPs, employee stock option plans, and simplified cross-border financing through standardized investment documents and stronger protection for minority investors. The objective is to eliminate the bureaucratic fragmentation that has long pushed European startups to relocate their legal structures to the United States, the so-called Delaware flip, and to make Europe a market as easy to operate in as the US or China. As Ursula von der Leyen emphasized, if implemented quickly and decisively, the project would not only accelerate the growth of European companies, but also attract global capital into the EU. Weak capital markets and limited access to startup financing have long been among the European Union's most serious structural flaws. That is why this move is so critical for innovation on the old continent. Tom Henriksson, general partner at the VC firm OpenOcean, commented on the initiative as follows, quote, "It's hard not to be excited. The plan for a fully digital, pan-European company form that can be easily created within 2 days will, if implemented correctly, at long last put startups on equal footing with overseas competitors. It's hard not to overstate the gravity of this." At present, acquiring companies in other member states or attempting to take your business across borders drops founders in the center of interminable maze of regulations. In-person meetings with notaries poring over every signature are woefully outdated, especially when inflicted on digital-first companies." Unquote. But this is not the only piece of good news for European investors. Von der Leyen also confirmed that Brussels is working intensively on the Savings and Investment Union. Why does this matter? Let's recall a fragment from our report in December. Europeans hold 10 trillion euros in low-yield saving accounts, a staggering pool of idle money. Europeans are far less investment active than Americans, and European startups struggle to secure adequate financing. Second, Europe must mobilize its own investors. If Europeans reached American levels of investment activity, it would inject at least 350 billion euros of fresh capital annually into the European market. As the president of the Commission explains, Europe needs a large, deep and liquid capital market, one that attracts a broad range of investors and lowers the cost of financing for companies, including equity financing, financial market integration, covering trading, post-trading and asset management, combined with more efficient supervision. It is meant to ensure that capital flows where it is needed most, to scale-ups, SMEs, innovation and industry. We don't usually like to boast, but it is rather telling that these very two reforms, EU Inc., presented by us under a slightly different name, and the Investment Union, appeared in the exact same order among the core reform recommendations in our December episode, EU is sleepwalking toward collapse. The third immediate priority identified by von der Leyen is the creation of an integrated and affordable energy market. The diagnosis that energy has become Europe's key bottleneck is correct, but unlike the first two issues, this one cannot be fixed overnight through regulation alone. Europe's energy predicament is severe because the continent, under German leadership, first made itself dependent on Russian hydrocarbons, and then launched a crusade against nuclear power. The transition toward renewables at the expense of fossil fuels is directionally sound. But too often the EU subordinated economic calculation to ideological interpretation. In other words, the transition was neither balanced nor stable. Now we are seeing a partial shift in rhetoric. Von der Leyen says the Union intends to promote not only renewable sources, but also nuclear energy. This is a significant change, especially given that Germany, von der Leyen's home country, until recently spearheaded the anti-nuclear crusade. It appears that Berlin has retreated from this position at the European level, even though Friedrich Merz, also speaking from Davos, reaffirmed that there will be no return to nuclear power in Germany. History suggests, however, that politicians have walked back from far firmer declarations. Regardless of the priorities outlined, von der Leyen is calling for an urgency mindset, and this is precisely where Europe's Achilles heel traditionally lies. Sometimes it's too slow, for sure, as Emmanuel Macron likes to put it. Europe will therefore be judged by results, not declarations, although the diagnosis itself and the setting of priorities do deserve recognition. The Commission President also addressed the hottest issue of recent weeks, Donald Trump's push over Greenland. While once again emphasizing the friendship with the United States, she pledged full EU solidarity with the Kingdom of Denmark and made clear that its territorial integrity is non-negotiable. The Union is also preparing what she described as an investment wave in Greenland. From a geographic perspective, Greenland is a bridge connecting Europe not only to the United States, but also to another friend discovered in hardship, Canada. Emmanuel Macron may have dominated TikTok, X, YouTube, and Instagram Reels, but it was Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who won the informal contest for the best speech at Davos in 2026. What earned him a standing ovation? Let's listen to a longer excerpt, because it is an exceptionally concise diagnosis of our contemporary reality.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. So what are our options? In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with the greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places a sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down.
Carney's closing appeal can be understood in two ways. As the Canadian Prime Minister explains later in his remarks, Canada is taking down the sign, openly acknowledging that the old order no longer applies, that the so-called rule-based order was to some extent a convenient fiction, a story we collectively agreed to believe in for the sake of shared development. That story has now exhausted its existing format. But Carney's act of taking down the sign carries a second, more explicitly anti-imperial meaning, one directed at his southern neighbor, as well as at Russia and China. In this reading, Carney is sending a clear message. If the world's small and mid-sized powers stop displaying signs of submission to Donald Trump, his power of intimidation diminishes as well. And since I have small kids in the house, what you are seeing on the screen now is a scene from Once Upon a Time in the Grass. The joint position of the European Union and Canada on Greenland made this point unmistakably clear, even if it certainly did not bring the saga to an end. Carney has effectively become the voice of the overwhelming majority of countries that are neither the United States, nor China, nor Russia. Countries that are deeply uneasy with a world order he described as one in which the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. An order that, in practice, represents a regression in international cooperation. By taking down the sign, Carney called on smaller states to stick together, while simultaneously building their own autonomous capabilities, something nearly every world leader now claims to support. Yet, as the Canadian Prime Minister himself warned, a world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. This stance and the shared EU-Canada position on Greenland has brought Ottawa and Europe significantly closer together. During the Q&A session, Carney naturally linked the potential of these two blocs, noting that together, Canada and the European Union account for roughly 20% of global GDP. Tellingly, despite geographic proximity, Carney paired Canada's economic weight with Europe's, not that with the United States, which is much closer. Of course, Canada's positioning is driven in part by Donald Trump's increasingly aggressive rhetoric, including his fondness for flooding the internet with AI-generated slop, sometimes even labeling Canadian territory as American. Some commentators have gone so far as to suggest that Canada should join the European Union. Under normal circumstances, we would dismiss this as pure political fiction, but given the direction contemporary geopolitics is taking us, nothing can be entirely ruled out. For now, Canada maintains a strategic partnership agreement with the EU and has joined the Safe Defense Mechanism. Further cooperation is not just likely, it appears inevitable. The European Union is also launching an offensive in other regions of the world. The controversial Mercosur agreement has been signed, but not ratified, and for now it has been effectively placed in the freezer of the European Court of Justice. As a result, the process has been delayed by up to 2 years. The agreement was opposed by Austria, France, Hungary, Ireland and Poland. Belgium abstained, the rest voted in favor. Potentially even far more consequential, however, may be the free trade agreement with India. Nicknamed the mother of all deals, the deal between Brussels and New Delhi is being framed as a partnership between the world's fastest growing major power, India, and what remains the world's largest market, the European Union. Taken together, the agreement would cover nearly 2 billion people, roughly 25% of the global population. The agreement, still being finalized as this script is being written, is expected to reduce tariffs, among others on automobiles, from the current 110% to 40%, and in later stages even down to 10%. India, for its part, is seeking easier access for its pharmaceutical and textile products, in part to offset the impact of US tariffs. New Delhi is also pushing for improved access for Indian professionals and workers to European labor markets. But there is something else happening around Europe. Political speeches are one thing, announced reforms are another, new trade agreements are a third. But around the European Union and Europe more broadly, a new interesting trend is becoming increasingly visible. As people watch what is happening in the United States, not to mention Russia or China, they are beginning to actively identify with what is European. A trend we discussed in our episode, The West at War with Itself. Brussels is preparing to launch Eurostack, which is about choosing European software solutions over American ones. But that's not all. Videos are emerging that promote European products and a European way of life, a phenomenon often referred to as Europe maxing. Calls to buy made in Europe goods are gaining traction. Predictions about the pressure to create European social media platforms are also beginning to materialize. The shift is visible in the data as well. In 2025, the number of Europeans traveling to the United States fell sharply. In a world that seems to challenge Europe from every direction, Europeans are beginning to feel a growing need to support what is European. Many of these initiatives will inevitably fail, but if the spirit behind the shift endures, it may turn out that Donald Trump has provided the European project with the strongest catalyst for change in decades.